Hello, I am Chris Blask. I'm Vice President of Strategy with Cybeats. I'm on Sam Clemens, just north of Howe Key, for those of you following along at home. With me today is SJ Terp, and I don't get much more excited than this, and I mean this very sincerely. Cognitive security. So much of what we talk about in this series of shows and in the industry about transparency, about having information you can use for purposes that are more and more critical, and which sounds a lot to me like words. Like, how do we talk to each other? How do we know what's real and not real? And normally, in these episodes, I don't do a lot of intro. It speaks for itself. But cognitive security is a very important space. And, of the three pillars, of security, there's physical security, obviously, and there's cybersecurity, and there's cognitive security. And in my own work, modeling through, defensive protective practices for utilities and nations and whatnot, you have to help people understand that I can secure all your physicals and I can secure all your, let's try this again, secure all your cybers. But if I can convince the operator in a power plant that the city's on fire, for example, then I can get them to turn it off on purpose. And we live in a world today we're all quite familiar with the information, disinformation, misinformation triad, and influence campaigns may or may not be something that people actually talk about, but I think we all understand that these days. And SJ, you have been spending all this time throughout your career in various stages working this issue. And as I told you when we first got on one of these, on a Zoom call or whatever it was, and you showed me the Sticks taxonomy for misinformation, and I almost cried, because we have to get to the stage that we talk about all in this cyber madness with human information. And we know that, we understand it. Marketing, Cambridge Analytica, political campaigns, influence campaigns, in this modern digital world where we either end up in some Neil Stephenson dystopia or we work our way through it. So as we discussed, before the bounce, if you can you spend a couple of minutes, tell us how you got here? What is a path that brings someone to be a cognitive security expert in 2022?
Well, it's a little like how you became a data scientist in the last decade. You were that kind of person already. You fell in with this group of people who did it, and you found something you wanted to work on and got on with it. And then gradually this field kind of grew up around you. So this actually goes back way before I was born. Both my grandfathers worked on deception. So one grandfather was up in the North Atlantic with inflatable tanks, believe it or not, before the D-Day landings. So yeah,
I love that.
Well, a few years back, Special Forces Softworks Innovations, we did a repeat of the D-Day deceptions, and it was just like this is like coming home. Thing of my grandfather's. So for me, I spent a long time working on autonomous systems and information fusion systems. So information fusion was the thing that happened before data science. We used to have data fusion, where we had lots of sensors out there sending back data, trying to work out what we call a situation picture, so what the hell is going on based on all these sensors. Then we realized we had messages that helped. So how did you add in these human reports? And that, of course, gets you straight into deception, because not all those reports are true. Some of those reports are deliberately not true. So it had been kind of hanging around this field for quite a long time. We used to have really fun meetings where we'd role play alternate sides and basically deceive each other until we ran out of money. So really that's kind of old of me. Round about 2009, 2010, I'd been running bar camps with friends, and we just run a big one first non-technical in London. So unconferences, the one where you kind of make it up as you turn up. And this call went out for anybody who'd recently run a bar camp to run something called a crisis camp. And that's how I ended up running teams and in organizations who collected data. So online, whatever we could get out of people's laptops, whatever we could get out of agencies, whatever we scraped out of PDFs or wherever, for each major emergency. So we did conflict until that became difficult. That was kind of the first times we found out about virtual PTSD. So it was really a thing. So we started getting sick because the material we're handling, up to that point, people assumed you couldn't get ill. Didn't have an effect if you were handling stuff that was just online. It was when we started realizing this is a second world. There's this second online world that's similar to the offline world, but they're connected, but not quite the same. But the effects are the same. So I worked on crisis mapping. I worked back in my old days also on how bots and humans work together. So how do you get automated systems? And you can think of it in terms of software bots, but it's also physical robots to share responsibility, to share control, to share that situation picture, what's going on around them, and a couple of other things with humans. So lots of work on what does it mean to include automated systems into a human environment? And of course, now we have this giant human environment called the internet. So we were looking at things like there are variations in how much control you have. So pilot authorization control of tasks as a framework for 5 steps between the human controls everything, they're just on a remote control, and the bot is completely in control of itself. And we realized that what you actually have when they're in control of themselves is a completely different culture that you're trying to match with. Very much like, I'd worked on NATO culture mapping. I was working on some of the early how do we share pictures? And that gets into how do you share pictures against people from different nationalities, different armies, different backgrounds. So again, you had these bots with a very different culture to the humans. So I'm working on this. I'm working over at Ushahidi, which is the Kenyan company that built the mapping software that we used for most of the big disasters. It's also used for kind of cute things like park benches. It was like GIS, but it was me pointing out, hey, this is actually a data set. We should treat this as a data set. So there was work from the European Union, 2012, 2013, right on to about 2016. But I was one of the people working on that, starting that project, and going in with experience of I had already seen people who just routinely lied on the internet. There was a disaster, you would always get people trying to pretend to be someone who's trapped. You would get the same damn bridge image would go up, the same damn collapsing building image would go up, the sharks on subway would turn up. They were just classic lies. And we had procedures to deal with that. We had like verification. If something didn't come from 3 different sources, we would call people up and talk through the data they'd seen. What have you actually seen? Part of that was working out, is this a genuine human? So this kind of fed into the European project. And amusingly, in 2013, we didn't have enough data. We couldn't find enough data on people lying on the internet at scale. By 2016, this has completely changed. So 2016, US election happens, and I'm looking at a lot of people working on what was then just called misinformation. Although, we talked about disinformation, but it was just like, just call it misinformation. They can handle this. They don't need to know about the big stuff. But so 2016 happens. People are talking about fake news. And they're worried about people lying on the internet at scale, polluting the inputs into what they call the user-generated content. So journalism industry, the funding sources are drying up. The newsrooms are shrinking. The amount of time they have for a story is shrinking. So they're starting to pick off stuff from the internet that's getting into the mainstream media. So they're worried about that as a source. And now kind of standing up, it's like early 2017. I actually let myself out of hospital. I was in intensive care, and I snuck out of hospital to give this talk. But there was someone I needed to persuade that this was actually a problem worth worrying about.
Time and tides, right?
Yeah, time and tides. got on the subway, gave the talk, went back to hospital, spent the night in hospital. It was fine. Yeah, it's like they'd have found me. But
I
anyway,
love my
so
tribe so much.
yeah, all your tribes like this.
Right?
So
Seriously.
so anyway, I'm standing up there saying, guys, this is not the problem you think you have. The problem is this looks like a large scale attack, and this looks like the kind of thing we're seeing in information security. So this is basically a worm. You're seeing this information be spread across these networks. This is acting like a worm. These things are acting like viruses. The narratives, the memes, are acting like viruses in the system. And actually, if you want to track it, if you want to think about countering it, there's this bunch of people who've had this problem for a very long time now, who've got a whole bunch of tools, a whole bunch of processes, a whole bunch of procedures. Start talking to them. And of course, start talking to them ended up as SJ runs the damn thing. so I've been there at the start of an organization called the Credibility Coalition, the standards body. So we started a hacker group in the Standards Coalition. Smaller number of hackers because hackers generally don't like real name policies and some of the other things that came with. So we created these coalitions. We created this coalition behind that of everybody we knew who was working on this boundary. We threw in narrative scientists because we knew that narratives were going to be really important. We pulled in people from ad tech. I actually started working at an ad tech company just so I could get at what are the data sets here, because one of the things in money-driven disinformation, especially at the time, there was a lot of, Russia, wherever would start a meme, a bunch of people would leap on that to try stealth shit. And one of the things they sold was your eyeballs. You look at an advertisement, the company gets money for looking at the advertisement. You click on something, you get more money for it. So there was money in there. So it's like, can we stem this funding for this part of the problem? At the same time, 2017, 2018-ish, there was a D-Day anniversary. So Softworks, which is the Special Forces Innovation Center down in Tampa, I was already hanging out with them for other things. I was just like, yeah, your tribe. We get called in occasionally to go solve gnarly problems. And they wanted to repeat the deceptions around D-Day, but do it for the modern age. And it was like, I was so tempted to go do the physical stuff because I love designing physical deception stuff, but they needed someone to handle the information space. That was me. So we pulled together another tribe around that and started explaining to the special forces that, yes, they had a problem too. And it wasn't just that rumors were going straight across areas they were working in. There was actually deliberate injection of information. So did that, did the D-Day repeats. We were obviously good at it because the thing we produced was instantly classified. So, and it went on, did other things. I was data scientist at the Global Disinformation Index. So part of the cut down the advertising funding is you need to know the sites that are an issue. So we worked on how do you tag this. At the time, there were things like tagging was on whether something is right wing or left wing. Still, if you look at some of the major like Media Bias Fact Check, you see the sites tag left wing or right wing. There was so much that was so much in the American context and not looking at the rest of the world. Right. Right wing, left wing here in America is actually both right in Europe. So it's like, how do we tag this better? How do we talk about this better? So we talked about things like, instead of talking about left and right wing, talk about whether a group is being targeted by this. So we changed out the tagging systems. We were finding sites. We were hunting pink slime, which are groups of sites all set up to reinforce each other that look like local news sites. So this is kind of information desert problem, is that one thing that I've also worked on setting up the UNDP system for elections all around the world. And I was heading the WHO Europe work on disinformation response to COVID, infodemic misinformation. So You're seeing these spaces where misinformation is everywhere, and the information sources that should be there just aren't. It's like I was finding countries which had these beautifully funded COVID information sites with question and answers, FAQs, lovely, lovely, lovely things that had no social media presence. It's like, dudes, go where the people are. So that got into like posting seeking behavior, but that's kind of a secondary stuff. I'm boring you. So basically, we set up the we set up a working group in the Credibility Coalition. We kind of outgrew that, and we needed to add all the hackers back in and actually do active work. So we built the CogSec Collab. We built the CogSec Collab, and we did an awful lot of work tracking not just COVID information, but also other interesting information events. Let's leave it at that. And then we've built the Disarm Foundation. So one thing we did as part of those standards was we picked up existing InfoSec standards. In fact, we picked up InfoSec advertising because a lot of disinformation is dark marketing. PsyOps, so what's now called MISO, intelligence operations, and a couple of other standards we found. Threw them all into a big pile, went, okay, what can we pull out of this? Looked at 60-something different incidents from lots of different countries and lots of different countries to themselves, countries doing charm campaigns, countries doing the full Russia, and built out something that now looks so much like the attack standard that MITRE picked up their own copy, and we're busy merging it back in again. So we now have Disarm, which is very, very similar to the attack models and uses the same tool set, which is why you saw the sticks tools. It's like, hey, we just pick it up. Right. We got this.
There's so many points in that.
I haven't even told you where I am.
We'll get that. The second question once we get to the present, right? And I have to, I have to explain, maybe to everybody, because people tend to know me as that cybersecurity guy, but in my early internet days, in the very early 90s, on Usenet, there was the Good Times virus, and which was an email that said, "Oh my God, there's this virus called Good Times. It shows up in an email. Tell all your friends not to do anything, not to open it," which led to the internet crashing because that got repeated as the code inside the email said. To the point that it was 90% of the content of the internet was that email being argued about. And at the time, I had, I was really, new to all this and a young person, and I just put up my hands and said, I think it's a wetware virus. I think it is crafted to be transmitted across electronic means to display itself, input through the optic nerve into the brain, cause the brain to do things, causing mechanical functions with my fingers to propagate itself on the internet. And it was roundly shouted down. And Fred Cohen, who's been on this show before, and has become a very, very good friend and business colleague in the last decade or two, coined the term computer virus. And little did I know, as that young person out there, Fred was out in the world saying, "It is a virus, you idiots," while the rest of us were debating whether it was or not. Because, as you said in the beginning, this has been going on for a long time. I mean, your grandparents, we need to dig into that. Oh my God, that's
we don't have time for that.
not today. But I've referenced that in conversation in the show with various folks. Like, what we're really talking about is Mesopotamia, right? This is not cyber-y stuff. These are human records and influence and transparency and everything that's been developing forever.
But with the big data thing of the 3 V's: volume, variety, velocity. There's more of it. It's coming faster. You can adapt it at midstream, and it's all over all sorts of different channels at the same time.
Right. So in 2008, I just moved back from Canada into the States. I'm a Yank. My wife is Canadian. Our kids are dual. And they were a certain age, and that I was looking forward to walking them through political things and elections and whatnot in the States, particularly my son, my oldest, Damien. And it was obviously going from a Republican to a Democratic stage. It was after the Iraq War and so forth. We all thought it was going to be Hillary Clinton, obviously, and then this dark horse Barack Obama comes out of nowhere, and is interesting so I got involved and signed up on the mybarackobama.com website and found out that there was just tens of thousands of people creating content and creating groups and creating communities organically with apparently no direction from any organized leadership. So I ended up falling into leadership of the Obama Rapid Response Team. And I spent most of that campaign with multiple screens, watching the media, working with 4,000 teams of volunteers across the country and around the world, that fractalized down to, the, Charlottesville, West Virginia, ORR team, who may be 3 ladies that happen to have personal relationships with the editor at the local newspaper, to make arguments in real time with the public narrative we all saw in cable TV and the rest of the media, and convince journalists and other influencers to accept an argument, actually accept it, repeat it, and then build on that. And then to watch what came afterwards, effectively that team, it was just a time in history. The blogosphere and everything else was what it was. The other political campaign sites, I had accounts on those too. And if some paid staffer decided to let you do something someday, you might be able to do something. It was just definitely old school versus new school. And very similar in 2016, surprisingly enough. But since then, Cambridge Analytica and everything else, we have taken those 3 V's. It turns out you can do the same sort of thing like, any emperor or dictator in history would have done if you have enough cash. Just pay people to do a lot of things. Pay people to believe things. They're electric monks, for all you Dirk Gently fans out there. You can pay people to believe things for you and say they believe it. And we can build robots to believe things for you and say they believe it too. And in these gaps we have in this cyber infrastructure we built, to our, bending my long-winded comment to the topic at hand, this is different, but it's ancient. Mm-hmm. And we have some skills, we have some capabilities, and with you and Pablo Brower and a remarkably small handful of people and organizations in the world right now, we have a developing maturity in abilities to deal with this. In the Ukraine, I think we have something there, and Zelensky, his personal background as an entertainer, as a, somebody who knows how humans work. How do you get a room full of people laughing is a big question. And watching in this environment, what had been, still is, a dominant influence system in the world, Putin and the oligarchs, floundering in the face of what's just seems to me a very adaptive structure, leadership and population and so forth, who understand the influence thing and will create a video to display to the U.S. Congress with in mind the dynamics of the U.S. Congress.
We have purple teamed for the Ukraine early on, and everything we purple team is an idea they'd already done. Whoever is there, they are exceptional at this, but they've been doing this since 2014. They've been doing this longer than most other nations. They're experts.
Well, right. In 2012, people can look up the Gerasimov doctrine, which is entirely accurate, but, Valery Gerasimov is the head of the Russian chief of staff, military chief of staff, I think now. And it's since 2012, has been a political tool to use influence to, emphasize and amplify existing anxieties, or whatever they are. You don't have to be in favor or against those anxieties, but if they achieve your end by, discomfiting populations or causing that it happens, then strategically is frankly, it's a logical thing to do. But we're into the present now, right? So, right now, I spend almost all my time thinking about supply chain security, how we get attestations from point A, not to point B, to a point ZZ53 with enough transparency and clarity that people do things like run their business or secure their nuclear reactors or whatever, right? And I see a lot of parallels in that. And two, the one is our topic, the other one is sticks. What is the damn acronym? SDIX stands for information exchange. Yeah, but it's how you take threat intelligence and put it in a electronic document that's machine readable with fields. The exact same things going on right now with SPDX and Cyclone DX and the SBOM, the software bill of materials world. It creates a document with fields, we all agree, so they can make it machine readable. And with threat intelligence, we're 26 years now after the presidential executive order that sort of kicked that off. We have information sharing analysis centers and groups of them, and I'm involved, and you're involved, and I think you might have mentioned another one. And they're at a certain maturity level, long way to go. But we live in a world where it's not all darkness. It's not going to stay like this forever, I don't believe. I think a lot of the things we're working on now are connected. That the automation of transparency in that we have to have for supply chain, and we will put the resources in, and we are putting resources in now. And I think we'll furthermore drive an efficiency bonus. So they'll get adopted faster because organizations will go out of business if you don't keep up with your competitors. And right. So as the question says, Anthony, you can put it up there. The parallels between information warfare and cybersecurity trends. All these things, you've said, that I've just blathered on about, that we all talk about all the time, right? We're at this stage right now where everybody knows, and that's usually when it's not true anymore. By the time everybody knows, there's inflections.
We're moving already.
Right.
So we started on the attack frameworks. We have been moving the last couple of years to risk-based analysis. So we're basically shifting things like FAIR. So I have some time off. So my time off is finishing up the work on adapting FAIR. So the factor analysis information risk, I think, tool, which looks at the frequency versus the cost. So it's things like there's a bunch of costs that exist from things like Otis that we can adapt to disinformation. There's a whole bunch of monitoring and evaluation because you can't measure it, you can't easily counter it. You also need to detect it. So there's, we're heading beyond just admiring this. We already a couple of years back built a blue team framework, which was all the countermeasures you could use. So not just this is the bad thing, these are all the techniques, these are the behaviors, but what behaviors you could use to counter that. Luckily, MITRE just did the same for attack, which is kind of cool. We're looking at, so when I was over at the WHO Europe, we looked at the different timings in an event, which look familiar if you're used to using NIST. So what are the different stages this is going through over time? What are the different activities you do over time, from mitigation, training people, all the way through to recovering from an attack, which generally does things like completely break up your network. So how do you rebuild that? How do you restitch that? So the risk-based is practical. It's basically you never have enough resources. We know this. This is a song we all know and love. It's like, how do we work out which controls are useful, which controls are going to give us the best risk reductions? And hybrids. We're already starting to see hybrids. I mean, just this week, somebody managed to get a whole bunch of people off a jet in Israel just by sending a message to their folks. So it's coming. It's coming. A little bit of ransomware plus misinfo, but not that much yet, because I think the numbers, we have to assume that people creating this so far have used relatively simple things because they work. They haven't needed to be that complex. A lot of the creating the framings and getting ready for things like hybrids was because we saw this was coming. On the it's going to get better front, I think people are more aware. It feels like we've been through a hype cycle. When the internet was first young and there were just a few of us hanging out there, nothing was true on the internet. Nothing was true. Nobody used the real name. You didn't expect anything. It was just like it was fun. And then gradually, as the Eternal September happened and everybody turned up, and COVID has just made this, literally everybody's online now, there was this expectation that things should be true, that you can't start believing things. I think we're kind of moving down the other side of that slope, and we'll end up in okay, we've got to check what we're looking at. There is definitely management of those information spaces, management of trust, which I think, again, maps across to SBOM. A lot of that is about management of trust, management of provenance. So especially for things like images, the provenance isn't too hard to track. But there's a bunch. There's a load of stuff that is coming down the line. And we're pushing as hard as we can on it.
Yeah, and again, for anybody, listening to this conversation, just a cybersecurity person, this should sound really familiar, and
Mm.
I frankly challenge, you out there, if you don't think so, really think really, really, really hard about what our profession is. It's information security. We have
Yep.
glossed over this entire area, for 30 years of my career by calling it social engineering. That's just social engineering, which
Nope.
wraps up all of human interaction for all of history. No, this is as complicated as it gets, but societies have been dealing with this forever. This literally is, Anthony, the last question. This literally is, so for the background, uh, Chinese premier was talking to Henry Kissinger when Henry Kissinger was Secretary of State, and Kissinger asked, what do you think of the French Revolution? And the Chinese premier said it's too early to tell, right? So it's a standing joke, right? That most people out there know, but it's really where we're going with all of this. And I think this is fundamentally true of all things cyber security, information security, down into the specifics of supply chain and threat intelligence. These are all continuations of the long debate about that started with arguably the French Revolution, which is really simple. Either people are on average decent, smart and mean to be doing the right things and can aggregate, work things out, or we're just not. And we have to have authorities, dictators and so forth and kings tell us what to do. So this entire effort with the internet, open source code, free speech, democracy, and so forth is being acted out at a technical and procedural level with all of the global economic system, capitalism, supply chain security. Can I enunciate, will I attest to, in a business relationship, organically between my organization and your organization, as to what we're doing and live up to that transparently? Will I show you exactly what I said I would do and give you all the information so you can see it in real time, so that you can be more efficient, more secure, whatever? Can you and I just work this out between us? Or do we have to have some overarching control? So, not that I didn't put my own opinion on that, question entirely too much, but what and you answered it. There's hope. We're coming down the other side of this. The disinformation fog is not sustainable over forever, long term. So, yeah, looking forward, I don't want to, obviously none of us know in the next decade or two exactly how it's going to work out. But riffing on that theme, are we winning the French Revolution still over the long term?
I think there is now so much work in understanding this. It's a little like machine learning. I work on machine learning, and there's a lot of work on ethics and bias in the outputs of machine learning. It's like, using machine learning algorithm, it's more likely to send black people to prison than white people. And what it's actually showing us is our biases. If you understand that, the machine learning teaches you about the biases of your past, so that you can then fix that for the future. It's a similar thing. This is showing us our societies, warts and all. Every idiot in the corner of the pub now has a space on the internet. The people who would take advantage of a small number of people, the con men, now have a larger space on the internet. And I think this is part of the understanding we live in two worlds, and that both those worlds are valid and connected, that we will come to similar societal shifts in that online world that we've had in the real world. That's what I believe. I mean, there's also a heck of a lot of work to do on what eventually essentially is things like spam control. A lot of that is very similar to the work that we do on PCs, on cybersecurity. Like literally, I've just finished teaching a socio-technical ethical hacking class where cybersecurity, cognitive security, physical security were at the same level. Oh, great. Yeah, I will send you the notes for it. I think you'd enjoy it. But society is going to change. Yeah, society is changing in the space. The work we're doing is starting. And when I say we, the work that a large number of researchers, responders are doing all the way across the world, both in responding to this, mitigating for it, learning about it. It is just gaining traction now. Personally, I think we'll be okay.
So do I, right? It's interesting. It's not a very popular belief, and again, at least it appears not to be a popular belief, because if you want to be, get a lot of comments or whatnot, you can say, we're doomed or whatnot, or this is not, that causes a lot of conversation. But I think it's important still on, like in cybersecurity and critical infrastructure, it's very, very important. There's a lot of work to do, but let's not lose the fact that things are working. We've been through globally a hell of a last 2 years, but we're still here in better shape, frankly, than I thought was probable.
If you want to feel better, Purple Team Ukraine. It's
yes, right. Well, it may be the very crux. Again, this is not about politics. It's not about right left as Americans or anybody else really say it. It's about honesty and dishonesty, right? And it turns out, I believe very firmly, everybody of every political stripe likes to be right, likes to know that they can believe what they hear to a given level. It's just easier. It's human nature. And, because I think influence operators are enhancing people's biases. So, you actually believe, right? The real humans out there, myself included, I'll throw this last little anecdote out. But, at a very large company, I had a conflict of interest. It was written up with the conflict with the appropriate group inside the company, and I resolved that. We sold the company later on, and I contacted the what is that group even called? That deals with conflicts, and their whole team even. And I told them, so let you know this is resolved. I've already done the things that we agreed, all along, but now it's resolved. And I got a message back from the entire team thanking me, because no one had ever contacted them to let them know that their conflict had been resolved. Right? Because we don't understand, that, I like to be right, and I'm quite often not, right? So I like to say things out loud and be transparent about it, and have someone point out the flaws of my ways and go a different direction. I think we all really feel that way. And, this gap we've had where malicious actors, have a free reign like they have in cybersecurity in different stages along the way. There's no defenders and there's a lot of open space. If you can find it, you can exploit it. Is not a permanent state. That's not a steady state. That's a period in time beyond which we have to get back to arguing about actual worthy political issues, more or less taxes. I don't know, more of this, less of that. Everyone I know of every political stripe can talk about that. If
but
we
also
can get
we're past the cuckoo's egg stage, and we're now onto the wounded warrior stage of this.
Right. That's
we're
right.
maturing.
Yeah, we are. SJ, thank you very, very much. Come sail boats with me. We'll definitely do that. Done. Thanks for everything you've done, throughout your career. There isn't a more important space. So for everybody out there who doesn't know what you're up to, thank you for all of us.
Thank you. It's not just me. You're thanking whole teams here.
I know. Well, we had Pablo on as well. You're much more optimistic about the future, right? So
yeah, we balance.
Right, exactly. Cool. All right. Thank you. Thanks everyone, for your time.
Bye.
Cheers.